So starting with the, this is still November 25th, 2014, this is the third section. We're talking about how I was raped when I was a baby. And I'm just going to go up to this point, or this part, where the government really began a strategy of how they could rape me, and then how they were going to try to get away with it in the future, and train me to accept being raped, so that they couldn't get caught. So this was a much more elaborate, kind of premeditated idea. I mean, actually all of it was premeditated, but it started to take on more of a form that I can recognize as having to do with them wanting to protect themselves and have me look like I was never raped. And at certain triggers, I would allow myself to be raped in the future because of the subconscious and conscious threats that I would remember from being instilled in me when I was a baby and a toddler. So the milk job, or the milk for blowjobs, was basically, like I said, you know, when I was younger, they'd trade back and forth a lollipop and a penis, or a popsicle, like an ice popsicle, and a penis, and sometimes a banana. Not typically a banana, usually it was something harder. But, and then they occasionally would have like a cherry flavored condom on their penis, and then they'd move their penis between me and they'd have me look on a cherry popsicle, and then have the penis with the condom in my face. But they didn't always use condoms either, because I remember that. But occasionally they did, because it worked for them to use flavors with kids. And that was done to me in England, it was done in Canada, and it was also done in the United States. And so after they did that, then when they may have also used a bottle at that time, like not giving me anything to eat unless I did something like that, and then they'd reward me with giving me a bottle of milk. But if so, I don't really remember that so much. What I remember is that I was old enough to be walking, but I was still extremely young, so I was maybe 1.5 to 2, but old enough to be walking, so that I'd toddle over to the refrigerator, and I knew my bottle was in there. I had a bottle in the fridge all the time of milk. So they'd let me get hungry and wait until I toddled over to the refrigerator. And this was not just at my house where the government was controlling everything. This was done at other individuals' houses. There were a number of government officials' houses that I was taken into. It just dropped off, and then I had to stay the night with them. Sometimes one night, sometimes up for a period of 1 to 2 weeks or so. And they were practicing the exact same thing. So this was a huge government group that was doing this. And they would wait for me to toddle over to the fridge looking for a bottle. And then they'd have a man, usually the woman would be with him. Usually it wasn't the man all by himself. So typically the women were as involved as the men in all of this. It wasn't just like a bunch of bad men getting together. They were married to bad women and had bad girlfriends and friends and sisters and mothers that were completely involved in all of that. They were not just looking the other way, they were helping to facilitate child abuse. And if anything, they were standing by their man, because they would wait for me to toddle over to that fridge, and then they'd stand right next to their man. And as they opened the refrigerator door, and then she'd hold the bottle, and they'd have him drop his pants down a little bit, make me. They put the bottle in my mouth, then they'd tell me no, suck that, and they'd have me sucking this man's penis or licking it or doing something to it. Whatever, sucking it basically. That's what they'd coached me to do, like you suck on a bottle. And then they'd give me some milk. Then they'd give me my bottle. But if I didn't do that to this man, then they wouldn't give me my bottle. And so, when I was so young, I remember that whole routine. But again, like, it didn't strike me as wrong. Like, I didn't think I was doing something bad, because I was too little. However, they did this to me so much, and it was such a part of my early childhood, and with so many individuals, that I did not forget that they were doing this to me as routinely as sitting down at a dinner table together, eating with me. And I hardly remember any of those situations. What I remember is that they were making me do all kinds of things for them before they'd even let me eat. So, I went along with it, but then at some point I didn't like it. I mean, it wasn't fun, even as a baby, even if I didn't think it was wrong. It wasn't fun, and it wasn't satisfying to just be sucking on some man's penis. There's nothing good or in it for me as a toddler to do that. Get your penis out of my face because I want my bottle. So basically, a few times I got beat up. If I tried to move away, or like any kid who just moves away and doesn't want that, they'd smack me, beat me, and they started bringing in guns, and they were already using knives to cut me, and acid, like forms like hydrochloric acid, that kind of thing, to burn my skin. So they'd burn me in places, or they would cut me. And then when I began to understand, when I was old enough to understand the reality of a threat of a gun, I started using guns. And it then became this routine of you either suck on this man's penis, or we're going to hold this gun to your head and torture you. And they would do things like, when I was just barely old enough to understand what the threat of a gun was, they would do things like shoot animals, have them suffering and writhing in pain, so that any kid, would look at that and see that this animal's in pain. Maybe you don't understand the whole concept of death completely, but you understand when something is hurting or bleeding. And so they wanted me to recognize that a gun, if they pulled the trigger, could do to me what it just did to that animal. So they would cut me and do other forms of making me bleed, and then usually stop short of shooting me, obviously. Although I did get shot later in my life. And that was what they resorted to in order to start controlling me when I was resisting doing these blowjobs for them. And that didn't just happen like once or twice, where they started using guns and weapons against me to harm me. They also put a brace around my head, and they electrocuted me. And this was like a brace, was about this thick around, went all the way around like this. Had two screws, and you could tighten it with get a wrench, and they would tighten it, because it was an adjustable band that went around the head. And then there was a cord of some kind of an electrical cord. Sometimes they were using car like, you use those clamps to jumpstart a battery on a car. They were using car clamps and clamping it on and then starting up a car occasionally with a long extension cord running from the car all the way to wherever they were doing this. Other times they used a generator, like a small generator inside their house, that kind of thing. And it was like a handheld generator that you could take around with you. So they could do it that way, and then also, I'm not sure if that's how it always was when I was younger, because what I remember also is that at least at some point, it had a cord that was attached to the headband, and it went from that headband to a box, and there was this box, and it had controls on it. They turned the knobs, and it had a thing that would move and indicate what level of electrical charge was being sent to my head. But they would turn it up enough so that my whole body would vibrate and shake from this, and it was electrical. It wasn't just like some kind of a TENS machine. So they would use these various forms of torture, bring out the box, which I call the box, or hurt me in other ways. Sometimes they'd pull out my teeth when I started getting baby teeth, before I was ready to lose them. They'd help me lose one ahead of time, and they'd get a wrench, make me open my mouth, and they'd just take a tooth out. Sometimes they'd make it slow and painful for me. And then they they also would, on those metal things, the screws that were on the head there, they also, once this metal plate was over my head, the screws would be on, and then they'd start hammering on these screws, and use a hammer of some kind, so that these screws were making really hard contact with my forehead. And every single time they'd hammer, I could feel like I get this headache, my whole head reverberating this horrible headache, like a weird jarring sensation of metal. And it hurt more when they hammered on that, because whatever it was doing was affecting the electrical current that they had running. So then, so basically, I can't really explain what it was like, because about how many times they would do this to me. So if I tried to fight them off and not do the blowjob, they'd attack me. So they got me to the point where I wouldn't say anything, and I would go along with them, which is what they wanted. And after they finally got me to the point, like by the time I was maybe age 3 or 4, maybe 4, by the time I was to the point where they had done this so many times, so much, so many different people, it was a learned behavior and response that they had obtained from me. Then they began wanting me to act. So then they introduced not only not resisting being raped, but then they wanted me to act and pretend like I liked it. And I guess this probably is going to extend into like 4 different sections about this, because I'm going to explain how they were telling me to act, and the things they were telling me to say, and the triggers they were using, what they were doing to accomplish this. And the only reason they would do that is probably because when I was a kid, maybe it looked bad for me. But it looked bad for them if I was a kid. If I was older and they were planning to possibly, if I survived and they didn't bump me off early, I think they wanted to have an excuse for constantly raping me whenever they wanted.